welcome everybody. And again, Laura, thank you and Alan and all of your team for all the ongoing great work that you all are doing to pull these meetings together and keep the ball rolling on this effort. Thank you very much. And I want to thank everybody for taking time out of their day, especially during these strange times, to attend and to go to the trouble to attend remotely and adapt to all the technology. And it's greatly appreciated. Thank you all. And I wear another hat for NCDOT, and I've just been on the phone all morning with NCDOT and COVID-related things and budget-related things and financial-related things, because I chair the finance committee. And these are very strange and difficult times. And so for this committee to keep its work going is great and amazing and highly appreciated. So thank you all for all you do, and welcome, and looking forward to another productive meeting here. So I'll turn it back over now. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Tony. I echo your thoughts and compliments and comments as well. And I just want to say thank you to our team. And that is every member of the Ordinance Advisory Committee, but also our staff who have been working diligently on this as well. I've heard from a couple of you in between the last meeting and now, and I know that everyone has something to say, and please do not hesitate to bring them up during the meeting, but also in form of maybe by speaking, or also in the chat box, but also email. Even after the meeting, please don't hesitate to still bring forward your thoughts and your ideas as well. Everyone has something to say. Not every one of you is a technical expert or a regulation expert or a zoning expert, and that's fine. But you have ideas, and please feel free to reach out to express them. If I can't answer them, or if Alison and I are not able to jump on it, you can be very sure that Laura and Alan and our Camairo's support team will jump on those ideas. But I would say that I need your help in making sure that when we send information out to you prior to the meeting or after and ask you to review, please help us do so. One thing we do not want after this is that it's only what staff feels that have been put down, but also what you have helped us to shape and develop. I know there's a lot going on. We're all busy, but please, if you would take time, take a look at those. There is no bad question. Just ask them and just review them for us, and give us your opinions, give us your thoughts. Sometimes some of your questions may not even be ones that our ordinance group may be able to answer, but it's really on a comprehensive plan end. But if you ask them, then we definitely will make sure we pull Alicia and a team into that. It could be tree related, and Alison and a team, they're working on that, and we definitely will make sure that they do as well. So please do that. We live in, like Tony said, in very interesting times, and we want to make sure that what you're doing is reflected in the eventual outcome. So thank you for your dedication and your continuous participation as well. If we are not pulling you in, maybe you're a subject matter expert on something and you feel we're not pulling you in, please don't hesitate to communicate with us and say, this is the reason why I'm on this committee. I want to be able to provide value. You guys are not using me enough. I would like to be able to do this and that. Please let us know, because we don't want you to think that your role is just to jump on the virtual call, every, month and then just, listen to us. We want you to offer your expertise, and whether it's in one zoning district or another, or just generally, whether it's about our city, please feel free to offer them to us. Pull yourself in, push us, help us to think beyond where we are, so that together we can build that equitable and sustainable city. I was, my first meeting this morning was with students of Providence Day High School. And it's very interesting, some of their thoughts that you wouldn't think some of these kids understand a lot of what's going on with regards to regulations, heights, setback, and they've been paying attention. I mean, they were telling me on your website, you said so and so. I wasn't even aware of that information. As they were telling me, I had to be pulling up the website to be reviewing them. I mean, they were talking about council meeting last week, zoning petitions. I was kind of, whoa. I mean, I think we've got community that's paying attention to what we're doing. And so your work is definitely not in vain. So really appreciate your effort once again. And I'll turn it over to Laura and Alan and Camaro's team. Thank you.
Thank you, Ty. Let's get started. We will move on, and today we'll be talking about campus zoning districts. And as usual, before we get into the meat of the presentation, we'll just go over a few procedural issues. And again, we'll be using the chat function of Zoom. So at any time during the meeting today, if you have a question or feedback, we'll be monitoring the chat message box. So we will try to answer your questions as we see them, if we can. And if not, at the conclusion of the meeting, we'll stop and we'll talk about any questions or feedback that we have seen that maybe needs a little deeper dive that can't be answered in real time. And so we'll do that. So if you don't see your, if we don't answer your question and we don't get to you by the end of the meeting, chime in again and we'll try to do that as we go. As always, we're recording this meeting, and a recording will be available for you to go back and review or to pass along to anybody else who may be interested who is not attending today. It will be on our department's YouTube channel within 24 to 48 hours. I know that at least one of you got to leave early, so if you do have to jump off this meeting, at some point you'll be able to go back and see what you may have missed by viewing the recording. Again, as usual, we'll go through a presentation and we will talk about the topics of the day, both Laura and I, as well as Arista and Chris from Camiros. And then we're going to do something toward the end of today's meeting that we haven't done yet. We've got an issue that we're still working through, and Arista and Chris will be talking about what that issue is, and we need your feedback. And so we'll be actually doing a live vote a little bit later. We're going to give you some options, some things that we're talking about, and we're going to ask for your feedback on that. So that's something a little different when we get to that point. And I'm going to turn it back to Laura at this point to talk about today's meeting agenda.
Thanks, Alan. As you guys know, we're going to focus on campus zoning districts today. And we have 3 districts that we're proposing, and want to recognize that we have Arista and Chris from Camiros here to help us with the presentation and also to help us with the answering some of the questions through chat. So definitely want to welcome them as well as everyone else that's on the call. Before we jump into the zoning districts, we want to talk through place types. And remember, this is something that Alicia and Kathy and their team have as part of the comprehensive plan. But today I'm just going to do, since it's a brief overview, handle the overview for you guys and talk a little bit about the place types that are setting the foundation for the zoning districts today. So again, just to remind everyone, the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan sets the vision, the plan and policies for our community, and one of the implementation tools is our regulations and ordinances, which will be found in the Unified Development Ordinance. So remembering that important relationship. And part of the comprehensive plan are 10 place types. And we've worked through zoning districts for 2 of those place types, the general industrial and the light industrial mixed use. And at this point, just want to say thanks to the folks that provided feedback on those zoning districts that we presented at our last meeting at the end of May. Really helpful. We're working on updates, tweaks to the zoning districts, and we'll be coming back and reporting back to the full group about the changes. And in addition to the people that did that outside of the meeting, we had some really great chat at the meeting that also helped us look at a few things differently in those districts. Okay, so that being said, today we're moving on to the campus districts. That is one of the 4 work place type one of the 4 work place types. And at our next meeting, we will be talking, not our next meeting, but meeting after next, we will be talking about the commercial place type districts. So just briefly to lay the foundation for campus place types, these are really primarily large institutions or large office campus, multiple buildings, could be for educational purposes, religious, civic, health facilities, or again, a concentration of office and research development. So the primary use for campus could vary. You could have, again, one campus that is for maybe a hospital facility, another campus may be a university, another campus may be an office and R&D environment. So the primary uses will vary, but in addition to the primary uses, and this is something that'll be talked about again at the end of the meeting, we have supporting uses. So while a hospital obviously has the healthcare component, direct healthcare component, there could be medical office related to it, there could be restaurants, there may in some cases be some kind of lodging facilities that relate to that hospital. We really looked at this, the campus place types, with respect to context. So a lot of times there'll be low to mid-rise office or civic buildings, but we also, and you're going to see this in the zoning districts, we could have more intensely developed urban high-rise campuses as well. And again, campuses would be on one site or on multiple adjacent sites. Typically, they are located along at least one arterial and have also an internal circulation network that especially supports walking and biking. And just kind of get your juices flowing, thinking about this. These are just some shots of different campuses, mostly around Charlotte, that we are trying to respond to with the new zoning districts. And at this point, Arista and Chris are going to talk a little bit about the thinking behind these zoning districts and give you an intro before Alan digs into the specific standards.
Okay. Well, thank you for having us this morning. And I just wanted to talk a little bit very generally about these types of campus districts. Just to say a little bit of the experience that we bring with us. I've been doing zoning for 20 years, working with numerous big cities like Charlotte and kind of dealing with how these campuses integrate and these ideas of, for lack of kind of better terms, urban and suburban campuses that can be within a city. We've worked in Providence, which, as you're probably aware, has numerous educational campuses, places like New Orleans and Baltimore that have large hospital and school campuses of both types, kind of the more urban and the more kind of spread out. Recently worked with Pittsburgh on the riverfront to do R&D type campuses along that area because a lot of stuff is kind of popping up in there. So we really have a lot of experience in regulating these different types of campus zoning districts. And we're hoping to we're bringing that to Charlotte to really try to see exactly how we want to how the city will, how these campus districts will work specifically for the city. Next slide. So what we've looked at as we looked at these different place types is the type of zoning districts that are required. And really you have the campus place type, but as you know, these place types function as sort of baskets for the more specific type of zoning that comes out. And as we started to look through these, we looked at kind of the idea of an IC1 and an IC2 district, which are these institutional campuses, and I'll talk about those in a second. As well as one that's more specifically geared towards office, which we'll also discuss a little bit more. Next slide. So the IC1 is kind of something that you think about, you know, probably the best examples are large universities that are kind of spread out on a campus. But we wanted to look at these kind of larger, low-rise, kind of spread out, significant land area campuses that may be for schools or for hospitals. But we've also looked at them as things for continuum of care residential developments, which are those types of developments that have both things like nursing care as well as independent living facilities all integrated into one large campus. In addition, you may have religious uses that have very large campus type environments. So we wanted to be sure that we could bring all of those in together. And again, as Laura talked about, and we'll talk about again later, understanding that they're not just a hospital, it's got supportive uses associated with it. So as we looked at the type of campuses in Charlotte, we knew that there was one type, which is this kind of larger, more spread out type of environment. And then next slide. The IC2, which again looks at the same kind of basket of uses that would happen there, the educational, the medical, maybe social service. But these are a more urban environment. They're more tightly knit, they're taller buildings. Again, associated supportive uses are part of those, you know, maybe things like restaurants or some, you know, dry cleaners for the employees. But really looking at these as looking at these primary institutional uses that may build up rather than out. And so that's why we have these two distinctions between IC1 and IC2. It's really to deal with the two different forms and where they fall in. And then next slide, and Chris.
Yeah, so the third, sort of the third leg, I guess, of the campus districts is the office campus district, which is really kind of designed more toward large-scale office research, sort of corporate campus environments that might be a little bit more sort of single-purpose in their orientation than some of the other larger institutional districts. Once again, these would sort of have that idea of supporting uses. So you can imagine these would be largely geared towards sort of meeting the everyday needs of people that are going to be on this site working. So it could be a sandwich shop, a dry cleaner, something like a gym for people to use during their lunch break. But again, you know, subordinate to the larger use, which is the office campus, and not really designed as a high intensity sort of commercial or retail environment, but really more geared toward the scale of the folks that are going to be on site. Another important component of these campus districts, and particularly this one, is the idea of sort of this idea of internal and external connectivity. So making sure that we've got standards in place that allow buildings and amenities on site to connect to each other in a logical sort of walkable way, and also making sure that we're incorporating standards that allow these types of larger campus environments to sort of sit comfortably and connect to their surrounding contexts. That's it. Next slide.
Thanks, Chris. And I'm going to jump in here and talk about some of the proposed dimensional and design standards for these campus districts. And we're going to be using the same format that we used last month when we were talking about our industrial districts. And so we're going to be talking about what the place types have to say, and then how the proposed zoning responds to that kind of thought for the place types. And I've grouped, we have 3 districts, but you'll be seeing several tables on these slides, and I've grouped the IC1, which is the institutional campus, more suburban style, and the office campus districts into one column, and the industrial campus 2 into a separate column, because for the most part, the standards for the IC1 and the OC are the same. They are the lower rise suburban style, more spread out campus types of environments, whereas the IC2 is more of an urban form of development. And so the standards are generally different between those two groupings. So just for the sake of saving a little space, I've done that. So here we're talking about our lot size, and the place type says that the campuses may be on one large site or multiple adjacent sites. So while we don't propose a minimum lot area, because sometimes campuses are composed of several smaller lots that have been developed as one larger campus, we are proposing something new that we don't have right now, and that's a minimum district size. So we've looked at some of the various campuses around Charlotte, both the more suburban campuses and the more urban, and we feel that a 10-acre minimum district size for IC1 and OC are appropriate as a minimum, and the 5 acres for the more urban IC2. And so we're suggesting that. So that's a new concept. We've got some minimum lot widths, which are fairly small. And for our suburban campuses, we're proposing a maximum building coverage of 60%, and no such standard for IC2, nor are we proposing any maximum impervious surface requirements. Next, we'll move on to setbacks, and then we'll have a couple of slides that cover setbacks. But generally, in our less intense campuses, buildings are typically located further from the sidewalk, whereas in our IC2, they are, being more of an urban district, they are closer to the sidewalk. So our setbacks, our main frontage setback for IC1 and OC is 24 feet from the back of curb, and for IC2, it would be 18. Those are on main streets. And then on other primary frontages for the suburban style campuses, it's 40 feet. And for IC2, it's varies from 20 feet to 30 feet, depending on frontage. And then our secondary setbacks, it's 40 feet for IC1 and OC, and 16 feet for IC2. And then for limited access frontages or parkways, it would be 20 feet from the right of way for limited access, and for parkways, either 36 or 40 feet from the future back of curb. So you can start to see how these districts vary in terms of their form, the IC1 and OC being a more suburban form and IC2 being more urban. Continuing on, we've got some frontage build-to zones. In IC1 and OC, we're only suggesting that they be applicable if there is a main street frontage. And in IC2, we do have a build-to zone. And you might remember the concept of build-to zones from our TOD ordinance, which says that the building face must be in a certain zone. And here it's typically 0, which is right at the minimum setback line, all the way to 20 feet, meaning that you can't build a building any further away from the setback than 20 feet. Again, in IC1 and OC, we're only using that on main streets, but in IC2, we're using that on most frontages. And then some other locational requirements. A lot of this is very detailed, and eventually you'll be seeing this more in ordinance form. So I'm not going to go through all of these because it is quite detailed, but we'll hit some of the high points. Side setbacks, 10 feet generally, and then rear setbacks, 20 feet generally speaking. Building height, we're not recommending a minimum building height except for IC2, which again is the more urban district, and we're recommending a 24-foot minimum building height, which is generally about a 2-story building. Maximum building height, we are capping those at 50 feet by right in all of those campus districts. However, much like we have in our current zoning, we are recommending a 1-to-1 height plane. So for the IC1 and OC, although your by right height is 50 feet, you can go up to 80 feet if you increase the side and rear setbacks by 1 foot for every 1 foot of additional vertical building height. So for some of you who worked with our current zoning ordinance, this will be familiar to you because this is what we're doing today. So if you do that, and this is how you sometimes end up with a wedding cake style building. So as your building gets taller, your side and rear setbacks get greater. So up to 80 feet, using that in IC1 and OC, and up to 100 feet using the height plane in the IC2. And then if you remember our height bonus from our TOD work, we're recommending that we have a development bonus, a height bonus in the IC2 district. And if you provide enough bonus points, if you earn enough bonus points, either through affordable housing or possibly other means, you could conceivably build up to 200 feet in the IC2 district. And then a step back for buildings greater than 65 feet if you're on a main street. And then we've got a corner tower element. I won't go into that. That gets a little into the weeds. You can talk about that if you're really interested. We can explore that through the comments. Again, on this slide, we have an awful lot of kind of fine-grained, detailed requirements, but I'll focus on, for one, the maximum building length, which is 600 feet in the IC1 and OC and 500 feet in the IC2. Generally, this is in line with our maximum block length, allowable block length in those place types. We have some ground floor transparency requirements, which again will vary according to the district, and as well as our blank wall requirements. And no minimum ground floor height in IC1 and OC, but a 16-foot minimum ground floor height in IC2, with it being, as I said, an urban style of district. We pretty much are covering the IC2 with a lot of our urban style zoning requirements, some of them being very similar to what we did with TOD and what we did with light industrial mixed use, if you remember that district that we talked about at our last meeting. So some building design standards that will be applicable in some of these districts. We will have some modulation requirements for longer buildings. In the IC2, we'll have some entry spacing requirements. At-grade entrance, prominent at-grade entrance. In the IC1 and OC, that will apply only on a main street, but on IC2 will apply at all frontages, most frontages. And then we've got some pedestrian connectivity issues, and we're going to have some ground floor design standards, which we have not developed yet, but we know that they will apply in these districts. Also, parking structure design. In the IC1 and OC, you may or may not have structured parking. It would be probably something that would be used more in the IC2 district, although could be across all districts. We'll have some standards for those, and some of them, especially in IC2, will be very similar to what our TOD standards would be. But in all cases, vehicles in a parking structure would need to be screened by a wall or panel, and then depending on the district and the frontage, more stringent requirements would apply, and that could be ground floor activation of a parking structure, could be increased setback with a landscape yard, could be various other treatments of the parking structure. But there will be requirements in virtually all of those districts for structured parking, depending on the zoning district and depending on the type of frontage. The pedestrian connectivity requirements are very similar to what we proposed in our industrial districts. We'd like an internal sidewalk connection that connects all buildings to all facilities on the site, on the campus, such as parking areas and nearby bike facilities, greenways, plazas, open space, etc. And then we want an external pedestrian connections from buildings to adjacent public sidewalks and trails and parks and greenways. Unlike the industrial districts, which for the most part didn't have an open space requirement, campuses are a lot of times built around open spaces. And so we are proposing an minimum open space requirement in all of our 3 campus zoning districts. For all campus districts over a half an acre, we are proposing a minimum required open space of 10% of the total campus area. And in the IC2 district, 25% of that minimum open space must be public open space. Public open space, it wouldn't be required in the suburban style districts of IC1 and OC, but in the IC2, the urban style district, we do have a minimum public open space requirement. Parking will be covered in a separate chapter of the UDO, but we know that in our campus zoning districts, we will have standards for parking lot location. We will have a minimum parking requirement. In our IC2 district, we'll have a maximum parking requirement as well. And then in all districts, we'll have a bicycle parking, loading zone, and valet parking standards. Again, with landscaping and screening, we haven't developed these standards yet. They will be in the natural environment section of the UDO, but we do know that we will have standards for parking lot perimeter screening, landscaping for structured parking, loading area screening, buffer yards, and other screening requirements for trash and recycling containers and mechanical equipment. So that's a real brief and high level overview of some of the design and development requirements that you can expect to see in the draft of the 3 campus zoning districts. And we're going to go into a discussion of uses next. And I'm going to turn it back to Chris and Arista from Camiros to go through the next few slides. And Chris, I don't know if you're up next or if it's Arista.
I'm going to start, and then Chris is free to interrupt me if I miss something. As per our usual, even on Zoom, that's still how we operate. So as you know, as we talk about this, we're talking about institutional campuses and offices. And to us, just generally, it makes sense. It's the idea of a hospital or a university or a continuing care community or an office park or an R&D park. So we know kind of the primary purpose of what these campuses are. They're very specialized. But as we talked about, these places are no longer just offices, just a hospital. They have supportive uses both for the employees, for the visitors that are all going on in there so that you can, if you're in an office campus, you can get something to eat, you can get your dry cleaning done. I've seen them with barbershops. I mean, it's a whole gamut of things that support the employees and visitors to those areas. Same with hospitals that have a lot of stuff going on. And we want to allow those. And the concern that we're having is how do we allow those other types of uses, a restaurant, a retail, a personal service use, without having it overwhelm the institutional campus purpose? So essentially, kind of the example that we talked about kind of casually is you have a university, and of course you'd have a sandwich shop or a coffee shop kind of in place that's used primarily by the students but could be accessible to the public. Now, if we just allow the use restaurant within the use table and say restaurants are allowed in IC1, there's nothing that stops something from coming in on, say, the edges of a campus and setting up a McDonald's and a Dunkin' Donuts, all of them with drive-thrus oriented to the public and kind of overwhelming that campus feeling. It's kind of a simplified example, but that's really what we're trying to get at. So in our work that we've done, we've looked at a number of different ways to approach this. And I think that's on the next slide. Well, actually, I kind of talked through this one. Sorry about that. But really, this is the idea. You would see the use matrix, and we're trying to figure out how do we address these uses that support the primary institutional or office research and development use that's in place there. And our experience, and I believe it's the next slide, is it? Yes, it is. Thank you. Is the idea of there's kind of 4 approaches that we've seen used throughout our experience about how we want to address these. So the first is something you're probably all very familiar with. It's the conditional zoning district. And this is an option that you have now, that you would come in with the conditional rezoning application. That whole process allows you to control the uses that are there, put conditions on them, really create a mini zoning district. Now, for those of you who have been with us since the beginning of this project or have been following since the beginning, you know our goal has been to get away from having to do everything by conditional zoning. Not eliminating that process, but kind of getting away from it so things are clearer, easier to administer, more predictable with a by right zoning approach. But in terms of this issue, conditional zoning is an option. The second option is to look at uses that aren't those primary institutional or office uses that are part of the district. So not a healthcare facility, not an educational facility, but things like restaurants, retail, personal service. And when they are within these districts, the IC1, the IC2, the OC, that we put some standards on them. We need to make sure that they complement, support the primary use. It may be things, and we don't have these nailed down yet, things like limitations on the size of such uses, the hours of operation, kind of the design of how they are integrated into the campuses. So this would be a matter of going through that use matrix that you all have seen that we talked about kind of at the first OAC meeting and adding standards to every one of the uses that isn't that primary institutional use. So it would be adding a lot of standards. It's kind of the downside of that. In other places, the third approach that we've used is rather than allowing for things like restaurant, retail, personal service as a separate use within that use matrix, that we just define that principal campus use. So we would define educational facility, university, college as inclusive of restaurant uses, service uses, all geared towards the students. So you don't get a separate use in the table that allows for a restaurant. It's just considered part of the definition of a college or a university. And then finally, what we've also done elsewhere, this is kind of the fourth option, is the institution controls it. We don't really do anything. We add in the institutional uses that we want, and then we add in the uses that we know would support them. So if it's an office district, it could have personal services as permitted, it could have retail as permitted, it could have restaurant as permitted, and essentially allowing the campus and the kind of whoever controls that campus development to control the range of uses that would be allowed within there. It's kind of the shopping center type control over who the tenants are. So it's kind of the almost do nothing approach. It's basically allow these and allow the institution to control them. So I'd be happy to, we can explain these more in detail if staff thinks we need to go through them some more, but what we really want to know, and we want to know your preference, which one do you think would work kind of best for this situation? We didn't want to go too far. We are mindful of time and budget and didn't want to start going on any one of these approaches to start fleshing it out, but we really needed to get some feedback as to which do you see as the advisory committee is the way that we should start looking and working on this issue.
So we're going to set up a live voting, which you should be able to see on your screen hopefully soon. Andrew, are you working on this? There we go. So you should be able to see, be available to vote on one of these four. I can see that you already are. Let us just ask that only members of the UDO Advisory Committee take this opportunity to vote. Thank you. And okay, we've got 10 votes, 11. If anyone is having a hard time voting or can't see it, let us know in the chat comment and we'll try to figure out how to help. And it looks like 16 out of 16 people have voted. There may be some others that need more time to read through these options again. So we'll wait maybe another 60 seconds or so just in case there are people who haven't voted yet who'd like to vote. And again, we've got 30 people in this meeting, and I know that not all of us are eligible to vote, being committee members. So haven't actually done a head count to see maybe the 16 people that have voted are the all of the members that we have in the room. So as I talk, we'll just let it go another few seconds and then we'll end the polling. And right now it's very interesting. It looks like choices 3 and 4 are our top vote getters at this point. Okay, oh, we just got another vote. Tiebreaker.
Just let me know, Alan, whenever you want me to end the polling.
Yeah, Laura, do you want to?
I think we're good to go to end the polling.
Andrew, let's go ahead and end it. And don't know what people can see on your screen, so I will.
So I just shared the results with everybody. You can see the final tally there.
Okay.
And then whenever you want me to close that down, I can stop sharing the results.
Yeah, so should be able to see the results on your screen. It looks like option number 3 received more votes than any other, and that's defining the principal use as also being inclusive of other supportive uses. So that's very interesting. Go ahead, Andrew, and why don't you stop sharing, and then we will move on. And at this point, that concludes our prepared presentation, but I noticed that we have been responding to some of your comments as well, but we're more than happy to stay here and keep answering comments through the chat feature if you like, and then we'll wait a while and see how many of those we get.
And Alan, as we're doing that, maybe just talk a little bit about some of the questions that we've gotten. We won't go through everything, but really kind of looking at, are we going to have these campuses better integrated into the community, I think is essentially making sure that we have smaller, more incremental development, and that is definitely the intent of this. And I think we'll see it more with transportation, knowing that sometimes campuses, and someone has brought up, I think it was Nate, security concerns that I think we're going to have more conversation about as well, particularly with respect to the transportation network, and clarifying a little bit that the office campus is really more akin to a traditional business park, and that for the more intensely developed office environment and a mixed use environment, we will be bringing you centers districts in, I believe that's the first half of August. So know that that's coming, and know that we're kind of having you guys look at this a little bit without the full context, but giving you the idea that like a Ballantine would be a center, which would be then something different from the office campus district that we're looking at here. Trying to, and Arista and Chris jump into as we were all trying to cover questions. Again, security needs, some questions about height, and I think we'll want to know what folks think, particularly height for the urban campuses. Chris and Arista, any, as you guys are answering, thoughts that we need to get up and talk through with folks?
I think you addressed basically the main kind of questions that came up. We did see those comments related to height and open space and parking decks. And I think once the OAC members can see the actual district standards, you can start to formulate either questions or specific potential revisions to those to kind of address those. So because really right now it's kind of conceptual standards that were coming in that we really do appreciate and that we're going to use that as part of the feedback. Just to jump in on the last question that came up here regarding housing as a primary use for IC1 or IC2, rather than type it, Chris and I are going back and forth trying to figure out who typed the answer. I'll just take it and Chris jump in if he needs to. Is really, we were looking at these as really being kind of these single purpose districts for these institutional uses and not integrating with the kind of the residential in there. That does not exclude things like dormitories that would be part of kind of people who stay there. And in particular, if you're looking at the OC or these other districts, they may have some kind of hotel options associated with them, as you see now in modern office campuses, as well as, you know, even in institutional campuses. I know that's technically not housing, but it's a type of living situation that goes on there. You know, so the thing is really to keep them kind of focused upon that. The exception, obviously, is these continuing care retirement communities, which are a full mix. They're primarily residential. It is a full mix of different dwelling types, as well as things like assisted living, nursing care, hospice care. So it's really a full community that allows you to kind of seniors to age in place through kind of all stages of life. So that's the one that is the exception, that is primarily residential.
Thanks, Arista. And we have one more question that I think has set us up for what happens next with the campus district. So with the question of how do folks provide more detailed feedback and allow the UDO members to engage more stakeholders? Is there a draft of each district we can review and have a few weeks to engage others and provide feedback? So we will do the same thing with campus on a little slightly different schedule that we did with the industrial districts, which means that we will give you guys the actual text as it is. I'll talk a minute about when we're going to do that and why. But we'll give you guys the text, and then with that, a form to fill out to get your feedback on the districts. And so that was really helpful for the folks that have done that in the industrial, and we will continue doing that as we release pieces for people to review and encourage, as Taiwo was saying at the beginning of the meeting, as many folks as possible to give us their feedback, because that's really helpful for us. Make sure we're not working in a vacuum. So with campus, we are going to talk about this a little bit more at our next meeting because of this use approach question that we had. So we want to go back and update this based on a use approach. We've kind of got a placeholder in there for now, and we'll need to update that component. We want to come back and present that to you at our next meeting, which is July 9th. And in addition, and after that, we will send you guys the full draft of uses and the district standards with, again, a few weeks to fill that in and survey any feedback, share it with other folks that you think could provide some valuable feedback as well. And in addition, at our next meeting, we want to talk about a pending update to the sign regulations that were approved last year, and make sure that everyone gets a chance to look at those. That has just been filed as a text amendment. And going backwards, I also want to note, and once we have it in a final format, that not this Monday, but the previous Monday, Council did approve the update to the TOD zoning regulations as well. So I think we've told you guys all along that we know when we first get some things adopted that we're all going to learn about maybe things we should have done a little bit differently, slightly different approaches, things that we need to tweak. And we have already done that with TOD. We'll be doing that with, well, bringing you what we've learned from you all and others about signs and suggesting some adjusted changes there. So if anyone has any final questions, final thoughts, if you don't mind putting them in the chat. And not seeing anything else right now. So I'm going to turn it over to Allison to close the meeting.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Alan, Rissa, and Chris, and team. I just wanted to say thank you to y'all. And then these questions in the chat box were great. We really appreciate your feedback. Like Ty was saying in the beginning, you know, we're trying to put these together, look at best practices, other cities, and try and think progressively. But you all are maybe developing these or designing these, or you live in these spaces, and so your feedback is critical. I know sometimes, particularly when we start sending you this draft text, it's pretty dense reading. It's a lot of details, a lot of numbers, hopefully less so than we used to have in the past and more pictures, but it's, you know, it's dense, but it is very important. So I just wanted to say thank you for all the comments. Please continue providing your feedback. We really want to hear from you and make this a really good document, a really good ordinance for Charlotte. So thank you, and we'll see you on July 9th.